Damon Ellis was 38 years old, and for 4 years he had been quietly paying a woman's cancer treatments $800 to $1,200 every single month, out of a savings account his wife never knew existed. Not because he wanted credit, not because he expected anything in return, because Loretta Wakefield was sick, uninsured, and her daughter was falling apart. And Damon was the kind of man who handled things without being asked. His wife Adrienne told her mother a church fund was covering the bills. Damon never corrected that. He just kept paying. $47,000 over 4 years. Then Adrienne served him divorce papers, requesting his home, half his retirement, and monthly spousal support, while he was standing in a work lobby. She had already retained an attorney 1 month after her mother's final cancer treatment. She used his money to save her mother's life, then used her mother's survival as her starting gun. What Damon did next, quietly, methodically, without a single angry phone call, would set off a chain of events nobody saw coming. She divorced him. Then her mom found out. And that changed everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The evening light slanted through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the wooden table where Damon Ellis sat sorting through the day's mail. Bills, advertisements, and circulars formed neat piles under his methodical hands. The sound of Adrienne's laughter drifted in from the living room, punctuated by the soft tapping of her fingers on her phone screen. He glanced up briefly, catching a glimpse of her profile in the soft glow of her device. She didn't look his way. These days, she rarely did. The ritual of sorting mail had been his for 11 years now. It was as natural as the way he organized shipping manifests at work, as automatic as the morning coffee he made for 2, even though Adrienne usually let hers grow cold. He handled things. That's what he did. A burst of laughter came again from the living room. "Oh my God, that's hilarious," Adrienne said to whoever she was texting. She didn't offer to share the joke. Last month's flowers still sat in his mind. A dozen roses he'd brought home on a Tuesday. No special occasion. Just because. She'd smiled, said thank you, put them in water. They'd died a week later, without another word spoken about them. His fingers paused on an envelope addressed in careful handwriting. The return address was from Birmingham. Loretta. His mother-in-law's precise script brought a small smile to his face. He almost set it aside in Adrienne's pile. These were usually for her. But something made him hesitate. The envelope opened cleanly under his letter opener. Inside was a card with pressed flowers on the front. The kind you'd find in a Hallmark store's sympathy section, but repurposed for gratitude. Damon unfolded it, eyes moving over the careful cursive. Each letter was formed with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years teaching third graders proper penmanship. "First and foremost, I thank God for carrying me through these dark times," he read. "And I thank my wonderful doctors who never gave up." His eyes caught on the next part. The words seemed to lift off the page. "And to whoever has been watching over me from afar, making sure my treatments were covered, Adrienne told me an anonymous donor set up a fund through the church. But I know God doesn't work anonymously. Whoever you are, you gave me more time with my daughter. I pray for you every night." The kitchen seemed to grow very still. Even Adrienne's laughter felt distant now, like it was coming from another house entirely. 4 years ago, when Loretta's diagnosis came, Damon had seen his wife crumbling under the weight of it, uninsured. Stage 2B. The numbers had been impossible for a retired teacher's pension, so he'd done what he always did. He handled it. The savings account had been his from before the marriage, built up slowly from his first job out of college. Every month for 4 years, like clockwork, $800 to $1,200 had moved from that account to the billing service. He remembered setting up the automatic payments, remembered telling Adrienne simply, "I handled it." She'd hugged him, crying with relief. He'd assumed she knew. All this time, he'd thought she understood where the money came from, who had actually saved her mother's life. But she'd created a story instead. A church fund, an anonymous donor, a fiction that wrote him completely out of the narrative. His fingers traced the edge of the card. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind you choose when you want the words to carry weight. Loretta's gratitude was real. Her prayers were real. But they were aimed at a shadow her daughter had invented. Damon stood quietly, card in hand. The drawer of his desk in the corner slid open silently. He placed the card inside, next to his passport, and the folder of important documents he always kept organized. Back at the table, he continued sorting mail as if nothing had changed, as if the ground hadn't just shifted under his feet. "Anything interesting in the mail?" Adrian called from the living room, her voice light and casual. "No," he said, his voice steady. "Nothing important." Her phone chimed again, and her laughter followed, filling the space between them with a sound that suddenly felt as hollow as the story she'd told her mother. The pre-dawn highway stretched before Damon as his truck cut through the morning darkness. Traffic hadn't built up yet. These early hours belonged to people like him, the ones who kept the world running while others slept. The card from Loretta sat in his mind like a stone, heavy and unmovable. He'd left the house before Adrian woke, same as always. His coffee mug sat in the cup holder, steam rising in the cab's darkness. Nothing had changed on the surface. He'd made breakfast, packed his lunch, kissed her sleeping forehead like he always did. But something had shifted underneath it all, like a foundation crack you discover too late. The logistics center's parking lot was half empty when he pulled in. Reggie's truck was already there. They'd started as line supervisors together 12 years ago, both of them learning the rhythm of freight schedules and shipping manifests side by side. Now they ran different departments, but some habits stayed. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and spreadsheets. Normal Tuesday stuff. He was reviewing quarterly projections when Sandra from reception called up. "Mr. Ellis, there's someone here to see you." The man in the lobby wore a cheap suit and a bored expression. "Damon Ellis?" "Yes. You've been served." The envelope appeared, thrust toward his chest without ceremony. Damon took it, nodded once, waited until the man left before walking to his truck in the parking garage. His hands didn't shake as he opened the envelope. They never shook. Steady hands were part of who he was, part of how he'd built everything he had. The papers inside were crisp, official. Petition for divorce. Irreconcilable differences. His eyes moved methodically over each page, the way he read shipping manifests. The house, half his 401k, spousal support for lifestyle maintenance. The law firm's letterhead was aggressive, bold font, sharp edges. The kind of place that advertised on billboards, that pushed hard and fast for settlements. The truck's cabin felt too small suddenly. He sat there anyway, reading every word twice. No mistakes, no misunderstandings, just clarity. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed Tanya's number. His sister picked up on the second ring. "Hey, little brother." She filed. His voice came out steady. "Just got served." Silence on the line. Then, "Tell me everything." He did. The papers, the demands, the firm. When he finished, Tanya was quiet for a long moment. "Two things," she finally said. "Don't sign anything, and don't confront her. Not yet." "Okay. I mean it, Damon. Nothing in writing. No conversations. I'll call you tonight." He hung up and sat there until his phone buzzed again. "Reggie, you missed our 2 o'clock." "That ain't like you." 20 minutes later, they sat in the break room, empty now between shifts. Damon told him everything. The card, the payments, the papers. Reggie was the only one who'd known about the medical bills from the start. He'd been there the day Damon set up the payments, had watched his friend quietly drain his savings to save his mother-in-law's life. "All those receipts you kept," Reggie said slowly. "That wasn't just you being you, was it?" It was exactly me being me. Damon managed a small smile. You know, I keep everything organized. Yeah, you do. His phone buzzed again. Tanya. I need everything, she said without preamble. Tax returns, bank statements, every receipt from those medical payments, everything from the last 4 years. How fast can you get it together? Tonight. Good. Call me when you have it. The house was dark when he got home. Adrienne's car was in the driveway, but she was already in bed. He could hear her soft breathing from their bedroom, still their bedroom for now, as he moved through the house to his home office. The filing cabinet opened silently. Everything was exactly where it should be, organized by year and category, medical expenses, tax returns, bank statements. 4 years of paper truth, filed away with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. He carried the files to the kitchen table, the same place he'd read Loretta's card just yesterday. The house settled around him as he worked, sorting documents into neat piles, everything labeled and dated, no detail overlooked, no record missing. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight. The box beside him filled steadily with paper proof of everything he'd built, everything he'd given, everything he'd done, without asking for credit or recognition. Somewhere above him, Adrienne slept, unaware that her husband sat below, organizing the evidence of her carefully constructed fiction's collapse. Tanya's law office occupied the 5th floor of a glass building in Buckhead. Damon arrived before sunrise, the box of records balanced carefully in his arms. His sister was already at her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, looking exactly like the serious little girl who used to organize her dolls by height. You really do keep everything, she said, lifting the first folder. Force of habit. He settled into the chair across from her desk. She examined the premarital account documentation first, her expression shifting from professional to pleased. This is good, Damon. Really good. Georgia law has specific protections for separate property. The fact that you maintained distinct records helps us argue against commingling. What does that mean exactly? It means we can protect the original account and its contents from being considered marital property. She lifted another folder. These medical payments, they're significant. Not just the amount, but the pattern. Regular payments, documented purpose, clear paper trail. This isn't just about protecting your assets anymore. This is about establishing a record of your contributions while she was— Tanya paused, choosing her words carefully. While she was planning something else. How long will it take to build the argument? Give me a week. And remember, say nothing to Adrienne. I know. That evening, alone in his home office, Damon began cross-referencing the payment records. Each transaction told its own story. Chemotherapy sessions, radiation treatments, follow-up appointments. He tracked them methodically, building a timeline of Loretta's recovery. Then he saw it. 11 months ago, there was a charge he didn't recognize. A law firm. He Googled the name Family Law Specialist. The date stuck in his mind, exactly 1 month after Loretta's oncologist declared her cancer-free. The realization landed like a physical blow. While he was paying for her mother's treatments, Adrienne had been planning her exit. She waited until Loretta was safe. Then she started building her escape route. His hands were steady as he opened his laptop. He began typing, "Dear Loretta, I hope this letter finds you well. I need to tell you something that may be difficult to hear, but you deserve the truth. 4 years ago, when you were diagnosed, there was no anonymous church fund. I set up the payments myself through a medical billing service. $800 to $1,200 every month, drawn from an account I had before marrying Adrienne. I'm not writing this to cause pain or seek credit. I did what I did because it was right, and because I couldn't watch Adrienne lose her mother when I had the means to help. I never needed recognition for it, but you should know the truth, especially now. Enclosed are copies of every payment record, every treatment, every appointment, every dollar that helped keep you here. I'm sorry if this changes things. That was never my intent. Respectfully, Damon. He printed the letter, gathered the copies, and sealed them in a manila envelope. The post office was still open. He drove there immediately, sent it priority mail to her Birmingham address. 3 days passed. He settled into his temporary apartment, a furnished place in Decatur that Tanya found for him. The walls were bare, the furniture generic, but it felt oddly peaceful. No pretense here, no performance. His phone rang on the third evening. 205 area code. Birmingham. Hello? Damon? Loretta's voice was barely above a whisper. Is this true? Yes, ma'am. A long silence filled the line. Then, how long? From the first diagnosis to the last treatment. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice carried something he recognized, the sound of someone who had buried a suspicion out of love, only to have it confirmed. She told me the church handled it, Loretta said quietly. I asked her which church. She changed the subject. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Don't apologize for telling the truth. Her voice strengthened. I'm coming to Atlanta. Mrs. Wakefield, you don't have to. Yes, I do. The steel in her tone was familiar. He'd heard it in her voice when she was fighting the cancer. And Damon? It's Loretta. After what you did, you've earned that much. The call ended. Damon stood at his apartment window, looking out over the Decatur skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For the first time since the divorce papers landed in his hands, he felt the ground solid beneath his feet. The morning sun cast long shadows through Tanya's office windows as Damon spread the timeline across her desk. He'd spent half the night organizing it, each payment marked with a date, each milestone in Loretta's treatment, carefully noted. Look at this, he said, pointing to an entry from 11 months ago. The law firm charge, 1 month after Loretta's final all-clear scan. Tanya leaned forward, adjusting her reading glasses. Her expression shifted from professional interest to something harder. She picked up a legal pad and began writing rapidly. This changes things, she said. The timing matters. It shows premeditation. She waited until her mother was safe before making any moves. She looked up at her brother. You're sure about these dates? I double-checked everything. The last treatment payment cleared here. He pointed to the entry. 4 weeks later, she paid the attorney's retainer. Tanya nodded, still writing. I'm filing our response today. We're contesting everything. The 401k split, the house, the spousal support claim, but especially that premarital account. She'll fight it. Let her. Tanya's tone was calm but firm. Georgia law is clear on separate property. You maintained distinct records. The account predates the marriage. And these medical payments? She tapped the timeline. They're not gifts, Damon. They're documented marital expenditures that allowed her to maintain her career and lifestyle while you carried a significant financial burden alone. Her paralegal knocked and entered with a stack of documents. Tanya signed them without hesitation. Her attorney will argue commingling, she continued. They'll say the separate property became marital property through joint use. I'm already prepared for that argument. She handed the signed papers back to her paralegal. I'm scheduling mediation. In the meantime, I need you to keep going through those records. Damon nodded and returned to his apartment. He spread the financial documents across his temporary dining table. Bank statements, credit card bills, tax returns. Hours passed as he methodically reviewed each page. Then he saw it. A hotel charge from 17 months ago. The Georgian Terrace in Buckhead. Weekend stay, room service included. He remembered that weekend clearly. Adrian had a conference in Charlotte. He'd driven her to the airport himself, kissed her goodbye at departures. The charge was on their joint card. His hands were steady as he pulled statements from the surrounding months. 2 more hotel charges surfaced. One at the St. Effe's Regis, another at the Four Seasons. Each corresponded to a weekend Adrian claimed to be traveling for work. Each appeared on their shared account. She hadn't even tried to hide them. The realization struck him. She hadn't needed to hide them. He trusted her completely. He was the man who handled things, who paid bills without questioning, who kept the household running so smoothly she could build her separate life without interruption. He photographed each statement carefully, making sure the dates and charges were clearly visible. He labeled each image with the location and supposed business trip destination. His logistics training served him well. Everything was organized, documented, indisputable. The sun had set by the time he finished. His temporary apartment was dark except for the dining room light above the scattered papers. In the window's reflection, he caught a glimpse of himself. Still composed, still methodical, even now. He remembered driving her to the airport for that Charlotte trip. She'd been relaxed, chatting about the conference agenda. He'd carried her bag, waited with her at check-in, made sure she had everything she needed, all while she knew she wasn't going to Charlotte at all. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he typed a message to Tanya. "Found something. 3 hotel charges. Call me." He began gathering the statements, placing each one carefully in the records box. The Georgian Terrace, the St. Regis, the Four Seasons, a paper trail of deception paid for on their joint account. Each charge told its own story, each false business trip now reframed in the harsh light of discovery. The box was getting fuller, evidence accumulating not just of what Adrian had done, but of who she was. Someone who could look him in the eye at the airport, accept his help with her luggage, and drive 20 minutes to Buckhead instead of flying to Charlotte. His phone buzzed, Tanya calling back. He looked at the organized stacks of statements, each one a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving until now. The truth was emerging, not in dramatic revelations, but in mundane details. Hotel charges, medical payments, attorney retainers, a pattern written in numbers, dates, and carefully maintained records. He answered his sister's call, ready to add these new pieces to their growing case. "Philip." Tanya's name lit up Damon's phone screen in the darkness of his temporary apartment. He answered on the first ring. "Talk me through these charges," she said without preamble. Damon pulled up the photos he'd taken, describing each one in detail. The Georgian Terrace weekend when Adrian was supposed to be in Charlotte, the St. Regis stay during a fictional conference in Miami, the Four Seasons booking that coincided with a training session that never happened. All on the joint card, he said. All weekends, she claimed, were work travel. "We need to know who was in those rooms with her," Tanya replied, her voice steady. "Not for revenge, Damon. For documentation. This affects the asset division, especially given her spousal support claim. How do we do that legally? Leave it to me. I'm going to contact Reggie's cousin, the one in corporate security. Public records only. Nothing that would compromise our position." The next morning, Damon went through his normal routine. Shower, coffee, work. He processed shipping logistics, managed route schedules, handled personnel issues. No one in his office would have known his personal life was unraveling. He'd learned that from his father. You carry your burdens quietly. Handle your business professionally. 3 days later, Tanya called him to her office during his lunch break. "Philip Garrett," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Regional Vice President at Adrian's firm. Based on the documentation we've received, the relationship began approximately 2 years ago." Damon opened the folder. Inside was a professionally assembled timeline. All public records, all obtained legally. Meeting schedules, professional directories, company announcements. Small pieces that, when assembled, told a larger story. 18 months ago, Tanya continued, Garrett initiated promotion discussions for Adrian. Senior director role. $40,000 salary increase. Damon traced the timeline with his finger. The first hotel charge was right after these discussions started. Yes, the relationship appears strategic on her part. She maintained your stability at home while leveraging his influence at work. Tanya leaned back in her chair. There's more. Garrett is married. 2 children. They live in Alpharetta. His wife doesn't know. No, her name is Coral. Tanya folded her hands on the desk. We're not going to contact her directly. That's not our role. But we're also not going to protect him. This documentation goes into our legal file. It's relevant to the asset division and Adrienne's characterization of the marriage. Damon nodded, still studying the timeline. Everything was so orderly, so planned. The promotion discussions, the hotel stays, the careful management of appearances. Adrienne had constructed her exit with the same precision he brought to his logistics work. Loretta arrived yesterday, he said, closing the folder. She's staying with her cousin in Decatur. Not with Adrienne? No. Adrienne called her about it. Loretta told her she didn't want to be a burden during such a difficult time. He almost smiled. Adrienne accepted that without question. She's not paying attention to the people around her anymore. The next morning, Damon met Loretta at a small coffee shop in Decatur. She looked older than he remembered, but her posture was still straight-backed, still dignified. She ordered tea and wrapped both hands around the cup, warming them despite the Georgia heat. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice low and steady. I knew something was wrong with Adrienne long before your letter arrived. Damon waited, letting her find her words. A mother knows her child, Loretta continued. I saw how she changed after the cancer treatment started. Not just worried about me, something else, something harder. When she told me about the church fund, I asked which church 3 times. Each time she changed the subject. I knew she was lying. I just didn't want to know why. The tea cooled between them, untouched. Through the coffee shop window, morning traffic moved steadily down the street. People heading to work, handling their business, living their lives, just like he and Adrienne had seemed to be doing, until they weren't. I wanted to believe her, Loretta said. That's what mothers do. We want to believe the best of our children, even when we see the truth right in front of us. Loretta set her untouched tea aside and folded her hands on the cafe table. Morning light streamed through the window, catching the silver in her hair. Her posture remained perfect, the kind of straight-backed dignity that came from years of standing before classrooms, teaching other people's children. I need to tell you something about Adrienne's father, she said quietly, about what happened when he left. Damon nodded, giving her space to continue. I was teaching 3rd grade at the time. Adrienne was 7. One morning, Marcus, her father, just wasn't there anymore. No note, no goodbye, just gone, with half our savings. Loretta's hands remained still as she spoke. I kept teaching, kept our routine, paid what I could, borrowed when I had to. We survived. She paused, watching traffic move steadily down the Decatur street outside. I thought I was teaching Adrienne something important, that you face hardship with grace, that you keep your dignity even when things are hard. But I've wondered these past few years if she learned something else entirely. What do you mean? Damon asked, though he thought he already knew. I think she watched me struggle and decided never to be that vulnerable. Not that you survive hardship with grace, but that you find security and always keep an escape route. Loretta's voice carried no judgment, just a deep sadness. She saw me work 2 jobs, saw me stretch every dollar, saw me worry about bills, and instead of learning about resilience, she learned about leverage. A server came by to refill their cups. They waited until she moved away. 3 weeks after she filed for divorce, Loretta continued, Adrienne called me. This was before your letter arrived. She told me. Loretta closed her eyes briefly. She said you had refused to support the family financially, that she'd been carrying everything alone for years. Damon felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. She was already changing the story. Yes, even to me. Her own mother. Loretta shook her head slowly. When she first told me about the church fund for my treatments, I knew something wasn't right. Every time I asked which church, she'd change the subject, talk about the doctors instead, or start asking about my symptoms. I had this feeling, this mother's instinct, that she wasn't telling me everything, but I buried it. Because you wanted to believe her, Damon said softly. Because I wanted to believe my child, yes. Loretta reached for her fresh tea, but didn't drink. That's what mothers do sometimes. We see the truth, but we look away, because facing it means facing something about our children we're not ready to see. Through the window, they watched a young mother pass by with two small children, holding their hands as they waited for the crosswalk light. Loretta followed them with her eyes until they disappeared from view. I won't be part of her narrative anymore, she said firmly. I love my daughter. That will never change, but I won't let her use me to rewrite what happened. Not with the treatments, not with your marriage, not with any of it. Damon took a slow breath. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. There's going to be a moment coming up. I don't need you to testify. I don't need a statement. I just need you to be present, to be in a specific place at a specific time. Loretta studied his face for a long moment. You're not going to tell me the details yet, are you? No, ma'am. Not yet. She nodded once, decisively. I'll be there. Whatever it is, whenever it is. You don't need to explain further. Thank you. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the morning crowd pass by outside. When the server brought their check, Loretta reached for it before Damon could move. Please, she said, already opening her purse. Let me do this small thing. Damon nodded and let her pay, understanding that sometimes dignity comes in the smallest gestures, in the ability to give something back, even when you've lost so much. The mediation room felt smaller than it was, all polished wood and careful neutrality. Damon sat beside Tanya, watching morning light filter through vertical blinds. The table between the parties stretched like a demilitarized zone. When Adrian entered, she wore a cream-colored blazer and pearl earrings, the professional polish of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Her attorney followed, carrying a leather portfolio. They took their seats without acknowledgement, Adrian's perfume drifting across the space between them. The mediator introduced herself, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and established ground rule. Tanya waited for her to finish, then opened with practiced efficiency. We're contesting the asset division on several grounds, she began, sliding the first document across the table. Primary among them is the status of Mr. Ellis's premarital savings account, which qualifies as separate property under Georgia law. Adrian's attorney, Peterson was his name, barely glanced at the paperwork. The funds were commingled over time. The separate property designation doesn't hold. That's an interesting position, Tanya said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that made Damon glad she was on his side. Because we have complete documentation of every transaction from that account over the past 4 years. No commingling, just a very specific set of payments. She reached into her briefcase and removed a thick folder. The sound of it hitting the table made Adrian blink. $47,000, Tanya continued, opening the folder. Paid in monthly installments of $800 to $1,200, depending on the medical billing cycle. Every receipt, every statement, every confirmation number. The mediator leaned forward. These were medical payments? Yes, Tanya said. For Mrs. Ellis's mother, Loretta Wakefield. Cancer treatments over a 4-year period. Paid entirely from Mr. Ellis's separate property account, which he established before the marriage. Adrian's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Her attorney flipped through the documentation, frowning. The payments were voluntarily made, Peterson said. Gifts to a family member. That's also interesting, Tanya replied, because Mrs. Ellis represented these payments to her mother as coming from an anonymous church fund. We have written confirmation of that misrepresentation. She accepted the benefit of Mr. Ellis's contribution while actively concealing its source. Adrienne whispered something to her attorney. Her composure had developed a hairline crack. Furthermore, Tanya continued, producing another folder, Mrs. Ellis retained divorce counsel exactly 1 month after her mother's final treatment. We have the timeline documented. She waited until the payments concluded, then began preparation to characterize Mr. Ellis as financially negligent. The mediator made a note. Adrienne's attorney shuffled papers. And finally, Tanya said, placing 3 credit card statements on the table, we have these hotel charges. Buckhead Marriott, 17 months ago. The Georgian Terrace, 15 months ago. The St. Regis, 13 months ago. Each corresponding to weekends, Mrs. Ellis claimed to be at work conferences in other cities. The room went very still. Damon watched Adrienne's hands. They had gone completely white, where they gripped the table's edge. Mr. Ellis drove her to the airport for those supposed conferences, Tanya added. The charges are on their joint card. Adrienne whispered something else to her attorney. Peterson cleared his throat. We'd like to request a brief recess. The mediator nodded. 20 minutes. They filed out of the room. Peterson and Adrienne first, then the mediator. Damon remained seated, hands folded on the table, watching sunlight move across the wood grain. Tanya stayed beside him, reviewing papers she already knew by heart. When they returned, Adrienne's blazer was slightly wrinkled where she had gripped it. She still didn't look at Damon. Peterson had new talking points, but his confidence had acquired an edge of caution. They spent another hour discussing terms, positions, possibilities. Nothing resolved. The mediator finally called it, scheduling a follow-up session. Adrienne and Peterson left first. Damon gathered his papers slowly, deliberately, maintaining the quiet precision that had become his armor. In the parking deck, their footsteps echoed off concrete. Tanya's heels clicked steadily as they walked to her car. She thought she was the one who planned ahead, Tanya said, finding her keys. The car chirped as she unlocked it. They got in without another word. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Adrienne was in the kitchen of what was still technically her marital home when her mother's number lit up the screen. I'd like to have dinner with you before I head back to Birmingham, Loretta said. At the house, if that's all right. There's something I need to say. Of course, Mama, Adrienne replied, already mentally planning the menu. Tomorrow night? I'll cook your favorite chicken. She spent the next day preparing. The house gleamed. She'd always been good at presentation. The table was set with the good china, candles ready to be lit. The familiar motions of cooking settled her nerves. This was her space, her mother, her carefully maintained world. The chicken simmered in wine sauce, filling the kitchen with comforting aromas. The doorbell rang at exactly 7. Adrienne smoothed her dress and opened the door with a smile that froze halfway. Loretta stood there, straight-backed in her Sunday best, and behind her, solid and quiet as ever, stood Damon. Mama? Adrienne's voice caught. I didn't. May we come in? Loretta asked. Not waiting for an answer, she stepped past her daughter into the foyer. Damon followed, nodding once in acknowledgement. The kitchen suddenly felt very far away. Adrienne's carefully constructed evening crumbled as she watched her mother take a seat at the dining room table, the one she and Damon had bought together 8 years ago. Sit down, Adrienne, Loretta said. Her voice was gentle, but carried the unmistakable tone of a woman who had made up her mind. Adrienne sat. Damon remained standing by the credenza, hands clasped in front of him. Loretta folded her hands on the table, her wedding ring, the one she still wore 30 years after Adrienne's father left, catching the candlelight. I received a letter, she began, and after I read it, I pulled some records, bank statements, payment confirmations, documents that tell a very clear story about who exactly paid for my cancer treatments. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Adrienne opened her mouth, but Loretta raised one hand. the same gesture she'd used in her classroom for 30 years to maintain order. It wasn't a church fund, Loretta continued. It wasn't an anonymous donor. It was Damon. $800 to $1,200 every month for 4 years from his own savings account. Money he'd saved before you were married. She turned to face Damon directly. I want to thank you, by name, for every single month, for doing it quietly, for never asking for credit, for saving my life without ever expecting anything in return. Adrian's fingers gripped the edge of her chair. Mama, you don't understand. I'm not here to fight with you, Loretta said, turning back. I'm here to tell you that I know what this man did for me, and I know what you did to him, and I will not pretend otherwise. The kitchen timer chimed distantly. The chicken was done. No one moved. The marriage wasn't working, Adrian said, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. You don't know how it felt, being unseen, being taken for granted. Is that why you told your mother I refused to support the family? Damon's voice was quiet, but it filled the room. The records say different. Your attorney has seen them. So has the mediator. Silence settled over the table like dust. The candles flickered, throwing shadows on the walls of a house that had once held so many careful lies. I love you, Adrian, Loretta said finally, but I will not be used as a character witness for a story we both know isn't true. She stood, smoothing her dress. Damon moved to help her with her coat, a simple gesture that made Adrian's throat tighten. At the door, Loretta hugged Damon. It was a mother's embrace, full and unrestrained. She did not turn back to say goodnight to her daughter. Through the window, Adrian watched her mother walk to her cousin's waiting car. She did not look back at the house. The taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving Adrian alone in a home that suddenly felt much too large, much too quiet, and far too full of truth. The morning sun filtered through Tanya's office windows as she placed the final document in the manila folder. She looked up at Damon, who sat across from her desk, his hands folded in his lap. Ready? She asked. He nodded once. The motion was calm, deliberate, like everything else he'd done since this began. Tanya filed the updated discovery motion electronically, then handed a copy to her assistant for physical delivery. The documentation was comprehensive. Hotel records spanning 17 months, credit card statements showing matching dates, and a detailed timeline of Philip Garrett's involvement in Adrian's proposed promotion. Everything goes through proper channels, Tanya explained. We're not being vindictive. We're just being thorough. Within days, the documentation reached Coral Garrett as part of the standard discovery process. Damon was in his office when Reggie knocked on his door, phone in hand. You need to see this, Reggie said, showing him a company-wide email. Philip Garrett had withdrawn his recommendation for Adrian's promotion, citing a newly identified conflict of interest. The carefully worded message said nothing specific, but its timing spoke volumes. By the end of the week, Coral Garrett had retained counsel. The news traveled through office corridors and break rooms, not as gossip, but as fact. Philip's careful world began to crack along its fault lines. HR launched their inquiry the following Monday. Adrienne was called in to discuss the nature of her professional relationship with Philip, particularly regarding his role in her advancement. She emerged 2 hours later, pale and tight-lipped, to find an email informing her she was being placed on administrative review. That evening, Damon's phone lit up with Adrienne's number. He watched it ring until it stopped. A voicemail notification appeared. He didn't listen to it. 10 minutes later, it rang again. And again. On the 4th try, he turned the phone face down on his kitchen counter and went to his workshop. The sawdust and linseed oil smell settled him as he worked on a coffee table he'd started the weekend before. Loretta's phone rang next. She answered, listening as her daughter's voice spilled out, rushed, desperate, seeking alliance or absolution or both. They're suspending me, Mama. Everything's falling apart. I need... "I love you, Adrian," Loretta interrupted, her voice steady. "But I will not help you manage this." The silence on the other end stretched long before the line went dead. The final settlement meeting came together quickly after that. Tanya had built an airtight case. The premarital account was protected under Georgia law, its separation clear and documented. The medical payments stood as evidence that Damon had consistently supported not just his household, but his wife's family, directly contradicting Adrian's claims of financial negligence. The 3 documented instances of marital infidelity eliminated any possibility of spousal support under Georgia's fault provisions. The house would go to sale, the equity split according to standard marital property division. Adrian sat beside her attorney as the terms were read, her face a mask of composure that slipped only once, when the medical payments were formally entered into record. She signed each page without comment, gathered her purse, and walked out without looking at anyone in the room. The late afternoon light slanted through Tanya's office windows as Damon sat across from her desk one last time. The folder containing his copy of the settlement lay between them, slim and unremarkable, as if it couldn't possibly contain the end of 11 years. Tanya slid it across the desk. Damon picked it up, tucked it carefully into his bag, and stood. "Thank you," he said simply. Tanya looked up at her brother, still standing, still whole, still the man who had paid a stranger's medical bills for 4 years without expecting recognition. "You did the hard part," she replied. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Damon's driveway as he pulled up to his house in Stone Mountain. The 2-bedroom ranch wasn't as spacious as the old place, but that had been exactly what he wanted. Something manageable, something his. The garage door hummed open at the press of a button, and he smiled at the sight of his workshop waiting inside. The smell of cedar and linseed oil greeted him as he stepped out of his truck. Half-finished pieces lined the walls, a side table he was building for Reggie's wife, a bookshelf that was taking shape slowly between weekend sessions. Sawdust dusted every surface, no longer a source of tension or complaint. He remembered how Adrienne used to wrinkle her nose at it, how she'd suggested he take up golf instead. The memory didn't sting anymore. His phone buzzed, a text from his new assistant confirming tomorrow's operations review. The promotion to Senior Director of Regional Operations had come through 3 months ago, after he'd streamlined their entire cross-dock process. His manager, Sarah, had called him into her office for what he thought was a routine meeting. "You're the most organized problem solver I've ever managed," she'd said, sliding the offer letter across her desk. "And you never make a fuss about it. You just get things done." He'd thanked her quietly and gone back to work, the same way he'd always done things. Inside the house, he set his keys in the ceramic bowl Loretta had given him at Thanksgiving. She'd driven up from Birmingham for the holiday, not because Adrian had asked her to visit, but because Damon had extended the invitation himself. She'd arrived with her famous cornbread recipe and stories about her garden club's latest drama. They'd watched football all afternoon, sharing comfortable silences between plays. No one was trying to maintain appearances or manage impressions. When she'd hugged him goodbye, she'd held on an extra moment and said, "This was nice, just being." Their phone calls had become a regular thing, every few weeks, usually on Sunday evenings. During their last conversation, she'd mentioned running into Adrienne at the grocery store when visiting her cousin in Marietta. Adrienne was living in a 1-bedroom apartment now, trying to rebuild after the HR review at her firm had ended with a formal reprimand and a transfer to their satellite office. The promotion Philip had dangled had evaporated like morning dew. Philip himself had moved out of his Alpharetta home 3 months after Coral filed for divorce. Last Loretta heard, he wasn't with Adrienne, he'd taken a position with a competitor in Charlotte, putting geographic distance between himself and the mess he'd helped create. Damon hung his jacket in the closet, remembering the voicemail Adrienne had left 8 months after the divorce finalized. Her voice had been different, smaller somehow, less certain. "I hope you're doing well," she'd said. "I've been thinking about everything, and things weren't fair. The way I handled it, what I said to people." She'd paused there, circling what might have been an apology without quite landing on one. "I just wanted you to know I think about that." He'd listened to it twice, hearing what wasn't said as clearly as what was. Then he'd deleted it. There was no point in keeping it, no value in turning it over in his mind, looking for meaning that wasn't there. He didn't hate her. He'd made that decision early, recognizing that hatred was expensive. It demanded attention, energy, space in your thoughts. He'd already spent enough on that marriage. The ledger was closed. Saturday morning found him in his workshop, sanding the edges of a side table he'd been shaping all week. Sawdust drifted in the slanted morning light. His phone buzzed on the workbench. A photo from Loretta appeared on the screen. She was sitting in her doctor's office in Birmingham, holding up a piece of paper and smiling. 18 months, cancer-free. Below the image, 3 simple words: "Still here." "Thank you." Damon set the phone down on the workbench, right next to his grandfather's old level. He picked up the sander, its familiar weight settling in his palm. The wood grain under his hands still had work to be done. He switched the tool on and got back to it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.